Here's today's question. Is all this talk of an AI bubble itself a bubble? For the past 2 years, we've heard a steady drumbeat that artificial intelligence is overheated. Billions of dollars are flowing into data centers, advanced chips, and frontier models. NVIDIA is investing in companies that turn around and use that capital to buy NVIDIA chips. Hyperscalers are committing to massive multi-billion-dollar CAPEX. From the outside, it can look circular and speculative. But at the same time, something measurable is happening beneath the headlines. Systems that struggle with meaningful software tasks just 2 years ago are now passing serious engineering evaluations. Enterprise adoption has moved from experimentation to operational deployment. So which signal matters more? The scale of the capital or the slope of the capabilities curve? Are we watching the early stages of the most important technology shift of our lives, or living inside a classic hype bubble that will burst soon? Today, we'll give you our perspective from inside the AI industry, not as spectators, but as builders deploying these systems with real customers. What does it actually feel like to operate in AI right now? What concrete evidence suggests durable value creation rather than financial excess? And what specific developments over the next 6 to 12 months would cause us to change our minds? Let's get into it. So let me kick this off with a little bit of discussion from my perspective. There's been a lot of talk about a bubble within artificial intelligence, I think for the better part of 2 years. A lot of that's being driven by just the massive cash infusion, the enormous amount of CAPEX going into this. I actually think all this talk about an AI bubble is itself a bubble, meaning it is mostly being fueled by people who underappreciate, who do not really truly understand how fast capabilities are advancing, how fast we are seeing acceleration in the improvement in models, meaning models have been improving, and I don't think anybody would deny they're improving, but the pace of improvement is accelerating itself. And I actually think that, at some point, all this talk about a bubble kind of has to pop because we're really seeing demonstrable evidence, more and more and more of this value creation. I would love to see if we could share from our perspective to listeners what it's like to actually be inside building production-grade AI systems and why we're so excited and feel like we're not inside a bubble. Okay, so Zizi, let me turn to you first. You wake up, this is what you do every day. Do you feel like AI is overhyped right now and we might be in a bubble from a capabilities perspective?
From a capabilities perspective, I feel like there are significant progress going on, and I don't see the sign of slowing down in terms of models capability, like the base model, core LLMs. I also don't see any slowdown of the hardness around the core model, like what we see in coding agents like Cloud Code. There are innovations that's happening in both places, both the core model as well as the tool calls, the skills, the memory modules that people add around it. And Ron, I really like, I think a previous point that you have made multiple times that, even if the core model capability stops improving, the residual heat, the residual impact of the models are going to propagate for many years to come. I totally agree with that. And I think that is happening in terms of the harness that people are building around the model.
Yeah.
But the core model, I'm not seeing it slowing down, just,
not at all.
Yeah. And I'm happy to dive deeper if interested, but
absolutely. I do want to dive deeper into that. And Michael, just to kind of get you on the record, are you feeling? And be honest here, do you feel like maybe there's a little bit of overhype, or no? Actually, for the average layman out there, they underappreciate just how fast things are moving.
I typically lean toward just being mixed. To be honest, this week I was using Claude Code to automate something. And I was very impressed. I basically delegated a very complicated machine learning workflow over to Claude Code, and it came back with a very reasonable baseline. And that's something that normally would have taken, even an expert practitioner days, if not weeks. And it's so incredibly hard to argue with the fact that you can do that now, and that we haven't even absorbed that capability into the industry yet fully.
Right.
But I think a lot of the benefit is kind of isolated to folks that are really nimble, that can do a lot of they can adopt things really quickly, like developers. But I think that in the industry at large, there is like sort of a human speed limit on adoption, where despite there being a whole lot of capability there that is just 100%, like it could do, like let's imagine it could do anything that a perfect godlike Oracle thing could do. There's still that human speed limit that we're running into now. But I think it's just the first time, maybe even in history, that we are such dead weight on the pace of innovation.
Such a great point.
It really is a good point. And so, all right, so I want to dig into this a little bit more, because I think this is a point that people miss a lot. And actually, I really think that because one of the reasons that we're so excited about AI is because you could argue that coding assistants have made the most progress of any sort of daily tool,
100%.
even beyond the chatbots. But I'm actually seeing even in my normal day-to-day talks, if I talk to the marketing team at Kung Fu AI, they are seeing a shift. They are seeing a massive, massive improvement over the last few months. Like, for example, Claude 4.6, Opus 4.6 is even in their own perception dramatically better. It's not just on the coding agent side.
Yeah.
And like you said, ZZ, I'm a real big believer that we've barely begun to absorb and understand the capabilities we have. We were talking before the show started that, I will regularly have conversations with people that don't understand that spreadsheets can be analyzed and slides can be created, or you could take a batch of 100 slide decks and spreadsheets and just put them in a folder and ask the model to analyze them and find, perform complex analysis and look for things where it falls short. So as much as I'm excited about the coding aspect of this, I think it goes beyond that.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
100%.
Okay. All right. So let's segue, like, on a project basis, on a day-to-day basis, on a work basis, we're seeing a lot of improvement within AI. We have this special perspective. Share with me examples that you think will help people really understand what it's like to be kind of in the eye of this hurricane.
So I've been mainly using coding agents for coding and many other things, because really, a lot of people maybe not realizing this when new to the field is, coding agents, they are good at generating code diffs. They can patch your code base, but they can do a lot more things. Like, a good example is Michael's example, where, you can let it operate your model learning workflow. And how long did your experiment run? Is it like, just several hours, or is it more than that, I think?
I mean, we had a beefy compute cluster that I was running on, so I feel like I should add that piece of info. But I think it was about 4 hours in total from the time. Like, I had this collaborative discussion at the beginning to sort of do a lot of planning.
And what was the task?
The task was to make a Kaggle submission for a Kaggle competition.
Okay, and so
in case literally that general.
Okay, so in case people don't know, Kaggle is this site where you can use machine learning to solve problems. So you were essentially trying to solve a problem, but using AI to do all the work.
Yeah, I basically started with a conversation. I said, hey, I want to solve this Kaggle submission. Here's some details about it. I've cloned the data locally. Here is how I roughly would approach it, and some steps I would take along the way for like a lit review, exploratory data analysis, et cetera. So I was very prescriptive about the workflow that I wanted to use. But once I hit the button and hit go, it took about 3.5, 4 hours in total. And when I went and submitted that submission, it's just a CSV file that it spit out. That is tested against a private, I guess the notebook I put together is tested against a private data set. So there's no way I could have known what that was. And it was a competitive solution. It was better than the median.
Yeah. And so meaning it was this holdout set. Yeah. Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And so that ran for how long? You said 4.5 hours?
About 4 hours, yeah.
Yeah, about 4 hours. Okay. So let's get, we're sitting here talking about some subjective experiences. I brought some data points on that topic. Meter, with METR, right? They have this data set where they're essentially doing task completion time horizon. That means a human task duration, so how long it would take human to solve a task, and how frequently an AI can complete that task. And it's a little bit interesting because they'll do multiple attempts. So a model may get it right once, fail the second time, get it right the third time, et cetera. And they base this at a 50%. So if the model can get it correct half the time, that's the score they're basing it on. That is now up to 14 and a half hours. Claude Opus 4.6 can now complete tasks that take humans 14 and a half hours, and it will succeed in half of those cases, which that's just astounding. Here's another stat for you. Stanford, the 2025 AI Index report reports an enormous one-year jump on the software bench performance. It went from 4% in 2023 to 72% in 2024, and we all know
that's incredible.
And we all know that that's nothing compared to what we would see for the 25 numbers. So I mean, just an enormous gains, and we're also seeing it with our own work every day.
And there's benchmarks like humans' last exam or last test or something like that, and it's getting, and models are getting good numbers on it. So as long as there's a benchmark on it,
yeah,
it looks like models going to beat it and saturate it.
Yeah, and I saw that OpenAI came out recently, and they said that they don't feel good about a lot of the software bench tests, but they think they've been gamed. The models are actually performing better than that, and it's difficult to demonstrate.
So in my personal experience working on client project, I've been using coding agents, several types of coding agents for the past year now. From in the beginning using Cursor, where it's a hybrid of editor autocomplete, to more full autonomous, like just chatting with the code, the agent using English,
right?
And then just read the code and then approve it, approve individual edits. To now it's, I don't look at the code anymore. Even I just ask, and then the like Cloud Code and the Codex seems to just understand my intent very well, even if I just say a few. Just a few words.
All right. So, I mean, I know somebody listening to this is going to say, well, how do you know if it works? How do you know to trust the code?
Oh, such a great question. They usually don't zero shot the solution, meaning they don't get to the correct solution in first shot. And I had a lot of pinpoints in it initially, and here I have several ways to deal with it. One is test driven. I would first, ask it to generate some unit tests, which I will review more carefully.
Mm-hmm.
And then, if the solution doesn't even pass that, it's not good. And then the coding agents is able to autonomously they can self-verify because they have the tools. They know the unit test, so they can write the code. They test it. Okay, it's not passing, so it will keep iterating.
Yeah.
And then there's also the planning tool. You can first iterate on the plan and edit the plan, and that also increases the success rate.
Yeah. And on that point, this is something, again, where I think we have a special inside view, which is it goes all the way back to that question about absorbing the technology capabilities as they exist right now already. Just knowing that if you put more time into planning and you iterate on coming up with a good plan will tee the model up for success, not only for coding, but for report generation or analysis or whatever it may be. We're getting better at understanding how to use these tools, and that's part of the return on the investment.
I mean, something y'all both kind of touched on in various ways is the fact that we can use AI to solve problems that AI created in the first place.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like if they have like the first solution's not right, you just ask it, hey, can you go fix it because you messed up X, Y, and Z. From my experience, I think the hardest part about AI adoption for both just like personal productivity use cases, coding workflows, whatever, is to just develop the mental reflex to always go back and use AI whenever you normally would have tried to go consult an external resource or whatever. If you just get over that one little reflex, I feel like it unlocks so much value in productivity.
Yeah, and AI is the answer to the AI problem, right? Just recurse on it more.
It's very recursive,
Yeah, I want to share some pain points too. Like, I'm sure a lot of engineers who use coding agents probably share the same pain, is that it also generates a lot of slop. Just imagine how many, see how many more pull requests are generated, and those huge
And they're
10,000
huge,
line code changes. Do you review them manually? And there are like hundreds of PRs for a large repo, from coding agents.
Well, okay, and so on that point, we need to eat our own dog food. So you take those pull requests and you tell the model to be more concise.
Hey, Copilot, tell me to review this PR, please.
Review this PR. This is too verbose. You can accomplish this much more succinctly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, a very practical outcome. So I was reviewing a PR recently that was created by a coding agent on one of our projects, and we did use Copilot, like the built-in GitHub Copilot agent, to review the PR. And I genuinely was impressed. Like, it caught some things that I probably would have if I went through with a fine-tooth comb. Things like pinning versions of containers that were tagged as latest and stuff like that. It really is a wild time we're living in.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah, I found it most helpful in resolving the version conflicts in my Docker file, like all the Python packages.
Yeah.
But verification is still a pain point that I feel like is not solved. Like it automatically trains a model. How do you know the model's good? The benchmark number may look good, but then are you sure that the model during inference will give you a sane result?
Right.
Typically, it's still a very manual, very ad hoc process now.
And, we're increasingly in the world where the outputs are language-based. And so just even evaluating them is a challenge, right? You get that recursive problem of LLMs as a judge, right? How do you judge the content, the quality of the model output? That is obviously a very big open problem. Okay, I want to pivot a little bit, guys, and I want to ask you this. So, I do want to talk about the capital expenditure stuff for a little bit, or let me just share a few thoughts. So, one is, having lived through the .com bubble, it was a very different experience than this is right now. And we were basically almost at the end of the .com bubble. It lasted, you could argue, at the most about 5 years. And I think, from the IPO of Netscape to the bubble that popped in March of 2020, the difference about that bubble versus this supposed bubble was the amount of capital that was going in during that time was all speculative. It was an enormous amount of CAPEX, but it was debt driven, right? And so that's really, really different now. Yes, you see Google saying they're going to incrementally increase their OpEx by 60 billion or whatever it is, but that is being funded through free cash flow, which is fundamentally different than we're experiencing right now. I think that's a really important thing. And also, the PE ratios are not really that out of whack. I mean, we had companies back in the .com days who were trading at, insane multiples, 100x multiples on phantom revenue. They weren't even profitable, right? These were, multiples trading against supposed flow. As nuts as the raises are by OpenAI and Anthropic, they are already generating billions in revenue. Now, I'm not going to stand here and say that both those companies are going to succeed and that there's nothing to worry about. That's an enormous amount of money, but they continue to grow and they continue to put out models that are really, really differentiated. Fundamentally, though, I do think open source is winning in a really big way because all of that eventually filters down. And in a funny way, most of the models that I'm using on a daily basis are actually open source running on my laptop, which I wouldn't have dreamed of 3 years ago. So, and then I've got just one more point, and I want to get y'all's take on this. So one of the reasons I'm so excited about where we are, and I wrote a blog post on this last year, was this idea of reinforcement learning with verifiable domains. And very briefly, again, for listeners, what that means is, using reinforcement learning to train a model so that it can produce outputs that are verifiable. For example, you can generate a program, tell if the program works, or you can generate a math proof and run it through Lean or something like that to verify the accuracy of that math proof. I feel like this is behind a lot of the improvements right now. Programming languages are Turing complete, meaning anything you can describe programmatically can be done. There's nothing outside a Turing-complete language. You couple that with the emergent behavior, and I think we've got line of sight over the next 5 years to a lot of gains. Okay, so all that was a big tee up for this question. What if we're wrong?
Mm-hmm.
What if we were at the top of the roller coaster right now, and we're about to go over the edge? Let's just take for granted that, there's a lot of gains still be had from the AI that's been developed. It will take years to disseminate those capabilities. But what if we're at sort of plateau? We've hit the wall. I have a question for both of you. What evidence would you need to see where you would say by 2030, if it doesn't happen, we've plateaued, that we actually might be entering bubble territory?
That's a great question. Thinking of bubble, I feel like, as of right now, there is huge CAPEX. So I feel like there could be bubble, but it's really hard to say because I'm really imagining, multiple trajectories of growth. The model capability, it grows very quickly. The business impact of the model, I think, is harder to measure. I think it's already, a lot of substantial values being created, not necessarily easy to measure using revenue, because there are, it can automate medical analysis and save people's lives, and that's hard to measure in revenue. And then there's the capital spending, like all the money that goes into data center and all the other GPUs. I think it really depends on, because capital spending, it can outgrow the capability growth, or it can underestimate it.
Right.
So it really depends on
all right. Looking through that lens, and I think you're right. I think that's probably the biggest concern would be, we're seeing gains, but the CAPEX is even beyond that, so we're not going to see the return. How would you know? Is there some capability? Is it the fact that maybe we might see a slowdown in the acceleration of performance?
For the core models capability, and I'm very curious to see to hear both of your points too. If you're talking about models capability, let's look at the kind of the three factors that determines it. There's the data, there's compute, and algorithm. Data. Last year, I think we talked about the data wall. Did we hit the data wall because all the internet is being pulled down by OpenAI to train GPT, and people were thinking, okay, did we hit a data wall? But then I think by now, people begin to realize that after ChatGPT is released to many users, and after coding agents, there's so much more data being generated, like all the thinking traces, and also the user feedback to the thinking traces in coding that people apply to different verticals, and also through different chats. Those data were not on internet before.
Right.
And now they're being kind of pulled out from people's brains and then gets fed into
not to mention there's more and more evidence that synthetic data itself can be incredibly information rich.
That's a great point too.
Yeah.
And compute, I don't see any sign of the hardware being stalled.
Okay, so all right, Michael, I want to hear from you, but really quickly on the compute front, because I think this is really an important point, which is one of the signs that we might be in a bubble is actually we don't need that much power. We're spending too much money on energy and power generation, or actually we've solved algorithmically some problem in a way that massively reduces the amount of compute that we need. And so NVIDIA demand for, frontier chips and things like that will reduce. Yeah. I personally think that that's not even remotely close to being the case, meaning that take, for example, my reference earlier to the open models that I run locally. I'm using more CPU cycles on my laptop than ever before, right? Because I'm interacting with it just constantly.
They're very warm.
And those are very, very efficient models in the grand scheme of things. So I think that also is just a complete red herring as well. Okay, so Michael, question back to you. what would you need to see so that you would change your opinion and say, actually, I think we may be entering the realm of hype?
It's tough to say. I generally fall in the middle in terms of whether I think we are in a bubble or not. And I think that's because, I guess it's a little nuanced, but I think that from a capability perspective, I've seen so much firsthand evidence that AI as an industry is 100% here to stay. I am like 10 out of 10. I would put all my money on the fact that like the concept of AI is almost like it's going to be like a utility. Like intelligence might be a utility in the future.
Yeah, it'll be
to like
diffused
electricity
everywhere.
It is here to stay from an economic perspective. The thing that I think really is bubbly, to to put a silly word on it, is that the distribution of that capital investment to a bunch of, kind of like runaway giants like the frontier labs, that I just don't see the moat in the long run. I don't see how, and I know that, there's so much investment going on right now to put these data centers in place that, like, we're going to use that compute no matter what. Like, I mean, Zizi and I were just banging down the doors this week at AWS trying to get access to GPUs. And the fact that we just can't for the life of us. And we have, like, this is for a client project, so we have the resources to fund this use case. And even after talking to people on the SageMaker team, et cetera, like, we simply just can't get access to those.
Yeah.
That tells me that people behind the scenes, even outside of Frontier, like, they're using these GPUs. But I still don't see the moat. And I feel like a redistribution of investment, like, there are going to be some big losers in the relatively near future, because another thing I constantly think about is that these big models right now have so much bloat in terms of memorization. When I think about a coding agent, those models are trained, they know the history of Rome, and they know, like, they have a lot of memorization in place. And when I think about, like, the efficient size of that cognitive core that someone like Andre Karpathy thinks about, it's got to be substantially smaller than a 500 billion parameter model, or whatever the case is.
Right.
I love that fact, because I think that the hope of people having personal, locally hosted frontier quality models is, like, I think that's a realistic hope in the coming years.
Yeah. Okay. And you bring up a really, I think, interesting point, which is certain companies, the frontier labs in particular, and these multi-$100 billion valuations, will they have differentiation? But I think that is a very different question than, is there an AI bubble, right? That is very much like, hey, will the frontier labs, will they be able to support this seemingly never-ending capital raise, right? Yeah.
Okay, Ron, I'm very curious to see your thoughts on, what kind of event would you characterize as a telltale sign of, hey, there's a bubble, kind of like internet bubble?
Yeah. I think when capital starts going into companies that don't really have any differentiation. What we saw during the .com bubble was, all you had to do was say you were something.com, go public, and there was such a frenzy within the commercial markets to get a piece of the pie that companies like, pets.com famously could raise, billions of dollars, and they were delivering dog food, right?
Right.
Yes.
I'm not saying that there will not be companies who add AI to their name. We see this all the time.
Yeah.
We see this all the time. The difference is the utility that was really, really apparent within the .com era was more diffuse, meaning all of a sudden it became possible for content to be distributed with essentially zero marginal cost, right?
Yeah.
You could communicate at zero marginal costs, and there were entire business realms that opened up because of that. But the value was perceived as being implicit if you were just a .com company. Like, everything was going to instantly move online, and they downplayed, I think, the physical realm, and that led to people overestimating how quickly it would transform things. Now, all of the capital outlay around high-speed telecommunications we were overbuilt for a while, but that's the foundation. That's the reason right now we can have all the, the gigabit home networks and things like that. AI is different in in several ways. One is the capital outlay is much more free cash flow driven. If you look at the biggest companies, Anthropic and OpenAI accepted, they're not funding this growth through debt. And the diffusion of AI capabilities is dramatically faster. There is pretty much nobody I know, even my least technical friends, that aren't using AI on a regular basis. And so the impact is really strong. Your point earlier is easy about, how do you see this hitting the bottom line? I think that's a great question. I've had conversations with companies recently where they're saying things like, everybody loves AI. They're using it on a personal basis at work. We're seeing, personal throughput meaningfully affected, but it's not showing up on the P&L.
Yeah.
I think that is a completely reasonable perspective, and I think that's going to continue to happen. But that is not because it's not valuable. That is because, as we talked about earlier, it just takes a while for these technologies to be understood and disseminated. And we'll look back. We're going to look back in 2030 and just laugh at how powerful we thought these models were, because they're going to be
much more powerful than now.
The models now are like idiot savants in comparison. And we already look back at like ChatGPT 3.5. And can you imagine having to use that now?
It's a baby.
It was a baby. That was just a few years ago. So I'm incredibly bullish. Okay, guys, that was a great conversation. I really appreciate your perspective as always.
It's a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for listening to Hidden Layers. This series is hosted by Kung Fu AI, a management consulting and engineering firm focused exclusively on artificial intelligence. If you have any questions or thoughts about today's episode, or if you know someone we should feature, please visit us at kungfu.ai.